Esther again tonight, Esther. So if you turn to Esther, we went over the timeline a little bit last week, and it is so confusing, and I'm not sure that I conveyed it very clearly either. And so if I could just make an attempt to clear it up just a little bit. In 586 BC, we had the children of Israel come into captivity, the destruction of Jerusalem, because they would not heed the words of the Lord. And so the Lord prophesied years of exile for them. They ended up being exiled to the country of Babylon. And there were various kings while they were in Babylon, and various kings would let certain groups of Israelites return back to the land, back to Israel, and then back to Jerusalem. And they would do various things. And this happened in waves. It happened over time. It didn't all happen at once. And so during those times, we have these books that are written to give us the instruction, and they're not chronological for us in Scripture, so it gets very confusing. So in 586 BC, they went over, and then various times down the line, counting down to 0, they were able to send waves of people back. And of course, 539 BC is when Cyrus became the king. He was prophesied back by Isaiah. And he allowed Zerubbabel to go back into the land and begin to build, and they ended up getting the temple built. It took several years, but they finally got it built about 516 BC. The temple was finished. And then you come on down several years later, and you have Ezra going over there, and he beautified the temple and the area as much as he possibly could, led a spiritual revival of those people. And then you come several years later, you have Nehemiah went in there, and Nehemiah was the one who was responsible for building the wall. All of those things happened over 100 years. And so it was not a slow process. You have these groups go back, complete these responsibilities, and then they would sometimes seem to fall back into apostasy or fall into disarray, and the Lord would have to send somebody else. So all this is happening while God's people, the bulk of God's people, are in exile over in Babylon. So to see God's working to fulfill his promises to his people, that he was going to preserve them, he was going to keep them a people, and he was going to also allow them to be restored, happened. The Lord allowed them to be restored in these different waves, but also he preserved those who remained in Babylon. Because they were there so many years that as they were there in Babylon, they were instructed to do this, to build houses and all of these things, and to actually be the type of citizens that would be good citizens in their captivity. And so one of these people who was there was Esther and her uncle Mordecai. And they were there, and now they come, and I don't remember what I said about last week, but I feel like I said it wrong. But they come between Zerubbabel and Ezra. So Zerubbabel was the first wave back. He led the folks back. They built the temple eventually by 516 BC. Maybe about 483 BC, somewhere right around in there, is where we have the book of Esther. So if you figure 515, 516 when the temple was built, and now you're going to come 30 years later. About 30 years later. So a lot happens in 30 years. A lot happens in 1 year. I mean, you think of the things that have happened in your life in the last 5 years. Then think the things that have happened in the last 20 years. Think of the things that have happened in the last 30 years. Life changes a lot. And it can do it in a short amount of time, but 30 years is a lot of time. And here, these people are all still in Babylon 30 years later. They're still Jews, they're still Israelites, but they are assimilated into the Babylonian culture. They live in Babylon, and yet there's a difference. Everybody knows these are not Babylonians, these are Jews. And at this time, the kings had turned over. Daniel the prophet had also been in between there. Daniel prophesied to Belshazzar, the kingdom's going to be taken from you, remember that? And then the Medes and Persians came in. And so now at the time of Esther, it's the Persians it's the Medes who are in control, who are in power. And that's who we have there, Ahasuerus of the Medes and Persians. And that's an important point to make because we see the adherence to the law of the Medes and Persians in the book of Esther, and that leads us back to the book of Daniel. So in your scriptures, the book of Daniel comes later, but chronologically, Daniel is before Esther. Daniel is far before Esther. So if you keep those things in mind, that'll help you. Daniel was there over the transition of the kings up to the king that is mentioned here while he prophesied. So very, very interesting when you start to realize all the things that are going on, and now you can really see how God was preserving his people in two different lands. He was preserving them in Jerusalem, in Israel, and he's also preserving them off to the east in Babylon. which is an amazing thing over decades, and over now centuries. God was preserving his people, and he did not let them be extinguished. That's what tried to happen in the book of Esther. Satan tried to extinguish God's people in the book of Esther, those who were in Babylon, and God put a stop to that, and that's what this narrative tells us. And one thing that we need to realize when we're looking at what God is doing in our lives, we need to start seeing the layers of what God is doing, because we can only see what's happening right in front of us, and often we can't even see what's happening. Even if it happened right to us, we can't remember what happened a few years ago. And we don't add up all the things that God has done and realize how each one affected the other. So often we miss that because we have finite pea brains compared to the Lord. But the Lord is giving us a bird's eye view of this whole situation with Esther, and he's showing us basically the end of it is the culmination. So the Lord goes back and says, let me tell you from the beginning, from the very beginning, what was going on here. And we have the understanding of their captivity. They're there in Babylon. They don't call the shots in Babylon. They're not the ones who are the king. They're not the ones who are royal. They're not the ones who are guiding the affairs of the country. They just exist there. They're able to be there, have jobs, have houses, have lands, all of these things, but they're not allowed to be the ruling class, except as appointed by the king in different ways. And so there's a great, that would be very easy for them to be taken advantage of, if not for the Lord. And we should recognize how the Lord was using these people, even in this foreign land. And we can come to several scriptures that remind us of that. In fact, if you would go over to the book of Daniel, and now we're backing up in time a little bit before Esther, but still in Babylon, still with God's people in Babylon. And remember Daniel and Hananiah and Mishael and Azariah had such a great testimony before the authorities of Babylon. This is when it was not Medo-Persia, but it was Babylon. And look at chapter 2 and look down at verse 46. Their testimony brought such an impact on Nebuchadnezzar's life. Then as Daniel was able to interpret the dreams, look at verse 46. Then the king Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and worshipped Daniel and commanded that they should offer an oblation and sweet odors unto him. Of course, Daniel had repeatedly said, I can only tell this dream because of the Lord working in my life. And so Nebuchadnezzar was not clear on worship. And so he began with the worship of Daniel. But he did come around to what Daniel said even, at least to recognize what Daniel was trying to say. The king answered unto Daniel and said, of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of secrets, seeing thou couldest reveal this secret. Then the king made Daniel a great man, gave him many great gifts, made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and the chief of the governors over all the wise men of Babylon. It's very interesting how these people are in captivity, and yet over and over and over again, God uses Hebrews, God uses Jews to have impact on the kings of that place. So that's something for us today to consider. Could the Lord use us to have impact on those who are in the government? Sure. Sure he can. And a lot of that depends on our behavior. The Lord can use us for that. And the Lord, in using Daniel, didn't just elevate Daniel, but he was protecting all of his people, because Daniel represented all the Jews. So you can see back in Daniel how the Lord was preserving the Jews and working so that they would not be taken advantage of, even in the place of captivity. Look at chapter 3 and verse 26. Here you have the fiery furnace, and they don't burn up. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spake and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth out of the midst of the fire, and the princes, governors, captains, king's counselors, notice all those authorities, being gathered together, saw these men, upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was an hair of their head singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire had passed on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's word, and yielded their bodies that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree, that every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces. Wow, how does that sound for God protecting his people? If anybody says anything against their God, we'll cut them in pieces. Wow. Their houses shall be made a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. And notice the personal promotion that the Lord brought upon these men. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Just amazing how these men, because of their testimony and doing what we would think, humanly speaking, would destroy them. Humanly speaking, we think this is the end for them. They're going to go in the fiery furnace. They're going to die. And God instead uses it to elevate them and protect his people. See, when we obey God, we are used for his purposes. But only when we obey God. When we resist, when we fight against the Lord, when we want to go our own way, and we want to complain, and we want to whine, and we want to squabble about it, we don't get used for God's purposes. But when we obey the Lord, we can be used for his purposes, and he uses us as a blessing, even to his people, and certainly as a testimony of him. Look at Daniel chapter 4, and look at verse 34. Another opportunity with Nebuchadnezzar. At the end of the days, this is Nebuchadnezzar ended up, remember, becoming a beast, living as a beast for 7 years. And at the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up mine eyes unto heaven, and mine understanding returned unto me, and I blessed the Most High God, and I praised and honored him that liveth forever, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. He's not saying anything wrong here. Where does he get this idea? Well, it was because of God's working through his people. All the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing, and he doeth according to his will in the army of heaven, and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand or say unto him, What doest thou? At the same time my reason returned unto me, and for the glory of my kingdom mine honor and my brightness returned unto me, and my counselors and my lords sought unto me, and I was established in my kingdom, and excellent majesty was added unto me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all whose works are truth, and his ways judgment, and those that walk in pride, which Nebuchadnezzar had done, and knew this intimately, he is able to abase. And so you see the Lord working there. Then in Belshazzar came in chapter 5, and we saw what happened to him. But look at Daniel chapter 6. Look at Daniel chapter 6, because now, as Belshazzar was there, and he saw the handwriting on the wall, remember that? And this night, things are going to change. Darius, who's also Cyrus, okay? There's another Darius, but this Darius is also Cyrus. It pleased Darius, or Cyrus, to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom. And over these 3 presidents, of whom, notice this, Daniel was first. Now you have, I've known some people who had a high position at a job, and a new company came in and bought out their company. And what happens to those high up people? They get axed. They don't last very long, because the new company wants to have their own people, and kingdoms do that as well. They want their own cabinet in, so just because you were there before doesn't mean you're going to continue there. And that should have been the situation for Daniel. Daniel wasn't even a Babylonian. And so what would he know? Well, the Lord had him in influence through over four separate kings in Babylon. Just amazing. And here, Cyrus comes in, takes over, storms the place, takes over Belshazzar's kingdom, and he makes Daniel the first of his 3 top men, that the princes might give accounts unto them, and the king should have no damage. So you got 120 princes answering to these 3 who answer to the king, and Daniel's the top one of those 3. Just amazing. But look at verse 25. This is after Daniel was thrown into the den of lions. Again, Daniel had the choice to obey the Lord or to disobey the Lord. Obedience means destruction for him. Obedience means not what he wants. Obedience to the Lord means lion's den. But the Lord turned that around. Look at verse 26. Look at verse 25. Then King Darius wrote unto all the people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. By the way, he could do that because his empire stretched from the Euphrates to China, basically, all that way. It was massive. India, including India. That's the kingdom went all. It was all Medo-Persia. He says, peace be multiplied unto you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom, men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. I mean, talk about a testimony. The king sends this proclamation to the whole Eastern Hemisphere. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom, men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and steadfast forever, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. He delivereth and rescueth, and he worketh signs and wonders in heaven and in earth, who hath delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius, and this is the same guy, okay, Darius and Cyrus. Darius, and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian, same person. Darius, basically, it's a word for, it means a king. It was how they would call a king. So Darius and Cyrus are the same person, but Daniel prospered there. See, so the Lord brought personal blessing to Daniel, personal prospering to Daniel, but he also preserved his people, and he also made his name great. Do you see how the Lord works when we obey? And he's working in vast circumstances where all we can see is this little thing in front of us. All Daniel's thinking about is, I'm going to go pray another time today. I'm going to go pray another time today. And the Lord's saying, actually, I'm going to have Darius send a decree to the whole world about me. And I'm going to use this to preserve my people. Because Daniel just went and prayed as he had aforetime. Just amazing how the Lord works. And that's what the Lord was doing, again, down the line in the book of Esther. That's why as we looked at Esther, we see that God's name is not mentioned. Not because he wasn't working, because he was working behind the scenes. So let's read in chapter 1. Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, this is Ahasuerus which reigned from India even unto Ethiopia, over 127 provinces. So Ethiopia, India to Ethiopia. And notice he says 127 provinces. Of course, if you go back to Daniel chapter 6, verse 1, he says 120 princes. And so you would think one prince for each province, but this is years later. And so now there's 127 provinces. So the empire is massive and has even grown. And because Ahasuerus has been out in conquest and he's been amassing more territories to himself and he's been quashing rebellions, and because he wants to show his great glory, we see what happens here, that in those days, when the king Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan the palace, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast unto all his princes and his servants. The power of Persia and Media, the nobles and princes of the provinces being before him, when he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom, and the honor of his excellent majesty many days, even 180 days. So for 180 days, he was basically putting on an exposition, showing everybody his great glory and majesty and power. What a marvelous king. What a wonderful king. What a powerful king. Look at all the things that he can do. Look at the nations that he's conquered. Look at these great trophies that he's brought from this land and from this land. Look at the tribute brought from this province and from this prince and from these people. And he would highlight all of these different cultures over which he was the king, over which his empire spread, and demonstrate the riches. And who was he doing this before? All the nobles and the princes and the provinces being before him. He had the heads of all the provinces, and he's demonstrating all of his glory to them, to lift up himself before their eyes, and also just to basically celebrate himself. And he did this for 180 days. That's 180 days. That's amazing. Just how could it take that long for him to do this? But it took that long for him to show. That's how rich he was. That's how wealthy he was. And when these days were expired, after the 180 days, then the king made a feast unto all the people that were present in Shushan the palace. So that's where the city is, where the palace was. And so everybody who dwelled in the capital city, he's going to throw a feast for them, a week-long feast for the entire city. Can you imagine what that cost? I mean, it's expensive enough to feed your own family for one meal today, let alone feed an entire city, and then at that entire city for a week-long feast. Notice this, the decorations are demonstrated to us. When those days were expired, the king made a feast unto all the people that were present in Shushan the palace, both unto great and to small, 7 days, in the court of the garden of the king's palace, where were white, green, and blue hangings. So a very colorful affair. They had all of these beautiful tapestries hanging everywhere to try to bring out beauty, to try to make the decoration nice. Maybe white, green, and blue were the Medo-Persian national colors. Ours are red, white, and blue. Maybe theirs were white, green, and blue. They were fastened with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rings and pillars of marble. So you can picture this in the courtyard of the great palace, all of these tall pillars of marble, and then between those things, linen ropes with these great banners that have these different colors hanging. I mean, it was quite a spectacle, and there's food everywhere, and there's people celebrating and glorying in the greatness of King Ahasuerus. These were the beds, or the bases, were of gold and silver, upon a pavement of red and blue and white and black and marble. So there's just opulence everywhere. The king is doing his best to demonstrate his riches and his wealth. And they gave them drink in vessels of gold, the vessels being diverse from another, and royal wine in abundance according to the state of the king. So we'll stop right here at verse 7 for a moment, because we need to recognize something. It's very difficult for God's people sometimes when we stand in the presence of greatness that we can physically and tangibly see. It's difficult for us to say, I'm going to obey God instead of this, isn't it? You can see all the great glory. You can see the concrete results of this man's way of living. You can see the great glory and majesty, humanly speaking, of this place. And yet God says we need to obey him. And that is the way it is in this life for us. Look anywhere you want to. Drive to some neighborhood in the area and you'll find great opulence, and you'll say, why can't my life be like their life? Why can't it be like theirs? Why can't I do what they're doing? Well, the Lord wants us to obey him in spite of those things, because those things don't accomplish anything for him. If we happen to have those things, it's just to be used for his purposes. God has us here for his purposes. Just like he had Esther and Mordecai there for his purposes. He had them there for his purposes in the nation of Babylon, in the city of Shushan. So as they were there, they had to look through all of these things and say, no, we're still God's people. We're still going to do God's work. And verse 8 makes a point for us that we want to highlight. The drinking was according to the law. None did compel, for so the king had appointed to all the officers of his house that they should do according to every man's pleasure. So as we are reading this passage, this might seem like an obscure thing, but the Lord is trying to point this out for us, that Medo-Persia was a place that honored their laws. By the way, that's also sometimes difficult for God's people to get around. When we see laws, we say, okay, I can't obey the Lord because laws. Now, praise God, in our country, that has not heretofore been a real great problem. Most of the laws, in old time anyway, have been supportive of God's way, not against God's way. But the more and more we see these things, we find laws that are allowing things that are against God's will. And eventually, if it were to continue, we would see laws that prohibit us from obeying the Lord. I mean, would they have thought in 100 years ago, they would have thought never in a million years will people be killing their babies in the womb. Not too long after that, now that's legal and that's allowed. And now they say, if you say that that's wrong, that you're a hate monger. And they almost want to require you to do it. And it wouldn't be that many years hence if we were to continue a downward trend, that there would be laws prohibiting the practice of our Christian faith. And certainly there was danger of that in the country of the Medes and Persians. And why is that? Because the king could make new laws with a breath. So while there was great safety sometimes in good laws, there was also the problem that new laws could be made that could prohibit them from doing what they were doing. That's what happened to Daniel. That's what happened to Daniel. Hold your place there. Go back to Daniel 6 again. Remember in verse 5, these men who hated Daniel because he was in front of them, they had a problem with submitting to his authority, and so they couldn't find the fault that they wanted to with him. So they said, we shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God. So they realized, if we're going to get what we want personally, then we've got to cause Daniel to have a problem with obeying his God, because we know he'll obey his God. So if we have to make the king make a law against him obeying his God, that's the work of Satan. So all these presidents and princes assembled together to the king, and they said thus unto him, King Darius, live forever. And they tried to get him to establish this law about those who would be cast into the den of lions. Anybody who would seek a petition of anybody else. Verse 7, any god, whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days, save of thee, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Notice verse 8. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing, that it not be changed according to the law of Medes and Persians, which altereth not. So, even monarchs have laws to abide by, and when the monarchs don't obey their own laws, then the monarchs end up getting deposed. And this is what this king was careful not to do, was to violate the laws of their people that they had established. And so it was the law of the Medes and Persians, when that was given, when that was written, it altered not. So when the king made a decree, that's it. And even he could not change it. So he couldn't say, actually, you know what? Change my mind. Actually, you know what? We're going to do it differently. The way I thought it was going to work out, it's not working out. We're going to do it differently. He didn't have the liberty to do that. Once he made a decree, that was the decree, and he could not change it. It altereth not. Wherefore King Darius signed the writing and the decree. Daniel knew that the writing was signed. He went into his house, his windows being open in his chamber toward Jerusalem. He kneeled down upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he did aforetime. Praise God for that. Of course, they were waiting to see that. They saw it. Look at the second part of verse 12. The king answered and said, as they brought their case before him, the thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. And they said, he's breaking it 3 times a day. But now we have it a second time written for us. The law of Medes and Persians altereth not. Come down to verse 15. Then these men assembled unto the king and said unto the king, know, O king, that the law of Medes and Persians is that no decree nor statute which the king established may be changed. So they were reminding him, no, you can't do this. You can't do it. And in fact, if you do it, we'll cause a problem for you, just like we did for Daniel. And so they were leveraging him based upon the law of the Medes and Persians. And we know what happened with that. The Lord protected him from the law. But Daniel obeyed the Lord instead of that law, without regard to whether or not the Lord was going to preserve him. We don't obey because it's always going to work out right, or how we think is right. We obey because God says obey. And then the Lord makes it work right, because we obeyed, because his way is right. His way is all right, always right. So he protected them in this situation. But it reminds us that the law of the Medes and Persians did not change. And the Lord is bringing this out in verse 8 to let us know the law of the Medes and Persians was still in full effect. And this country was very close to abide by their law. They weren't going to change it. There was no changing their law. And the kings, of course, this is drinking, which is wrong anyway, but the Lord isn't dealing with that. He's dealing with the law of the Medes and Persians. The drinking was according to the law. None did compel, for so the king had appointed to all the officers of his house. So you can see, even in this small way during his feast, the king made a law. That was the law. The law was, we're not going to make any man drink if he doesn't want to, but we're not going to stop any man from drinking as much as he wants to. You can drink to your heart's content, or you don't have to drink at all. That's the king's law. That's the law. And so that's what they did. And the point was that they should do according to every man's pleasure. So here is a very strange combination of law and absolute licentiousness, no law. They have the law established, but the law is you can do whatever you want. You know what we call this? Pure libertarianism. The law is you can do whatever you want to do when it comes to drinking, in this case. And so it was a time for people to fulfill the lusts of their flesh. Every man do according to every man's pleasure. Look at verse 9, because now we have the next cog in the wheel of this story. Also Vashti the queen made a feast for the women in the royal house which belonged to King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded, and he names these men. But we go back to verse 9. Also Vashti the queen made a feast for the women in the royal house which belonged to King Ahasuerus. So I don't know the relationship before this point of Ahasuerus and Vashti, but I doubt it was very great. She's having her party aside and separate from him with just the women, and he's having his outside with all of the citizens of the country, men and women. She's got just the women in her place there. This is not a healthy situation. This is not a healthy marriage. And we can get tied up in a lot of speculation, but one thing we should recognize is that there wasn't a healthy marriage here. And the Lord used that. Even the turmoil and the palace intrigue, if you will, the Lord was using that for his purposes. Because we have Vashti having a party with just the women. And when the king calls for Vashti, she says no. And she's with her girlfriends, and they've decided, no, we'll show him. We'll show him. I'm not going down there. I'm not bringing the crown. And the Lord used that. So look at verse 10. On the seventh day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he's drunk, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, Carcass, the 7 chamberlains that served in the presence of Ahasuerus the king, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal, to show the people, the princess, her beauty, for she was fair to look upon. So picture the king here. He's, for 180 days, has shown his glory to all of these princes. For a week, he has had a great banquet for the entire city. And now he wants to show the crown of his glory, which is, number one, the crown of his kingdom, and number two, his wife. He wants to show her beauty. Now, a good husband, a real man, doesn't show off his wife's beauty in that way. He protects her beauty. We see that from the life of Abraham. And didn't Abimelech say, isn't he supposed to be guarding you? Isn't he supposed to be protecting you? But instead, as he said sarcastically, but instead he did not. That's what Ahasuerus should have done. But Vashti the queen, in coming to bring the crown, disobeyed her husband. Now, I don't know, men, if we can put ourselves in his place, we are the great and powerful king of the whole land. Our empire stretches from Ethiopia to India. We have just spent 180 days showing the princes all the great glory. Then we've had a feast. We've thrown a feast for everybody. And now we want to finish it off by showing the crown and the great beauty of our wife. And we send this entourage to go and get her and to bring her here, and she says no. How would that make you feel? That would make you feel pretty demoralized. It would make you feel pretty enraged because nobody in the whole kingdom is standing up to you. You've got 127 princes, and they're all saying yes, and now this woman says no. At the very height of the time that you're trying to have there. So he was upset about this. And again, the Lord is using all this. So the Lord is using their bad marriage because these are the layers. And we would see these stories. Imagine if you were in that time hearing the news. You're hearing the news. And you hear the news, Vashti didn't come to the king. And you think, okay, all this drama, right? No, the Lord's using that. So we read the news today, and we think, well, that's news. Some of it's true, some of it's fake news, but it's news. And so you realize, you think, well, what does that have to do with me? Well, I don't really know. But you know what I should realize? I should realize that the Lord is working. And then trickle that down to my life. The Lord is working in my life. How will that affect me? I don't know if that one thing ever will affect me. But the things that happen in the world, the Lord is using. Remember, we looked at it last week. Romans chapter 8, verse 28. All things work together for good. What things? All things. That doesn't just mean the things that I'm seeing right now. All things work together for good. God is working all of the things together for good for his people. This is not something that we can even begin to contemplate how great God is, that he's using all of those things for the benefit of his people and for his own glory. We praise God for what he is. When we begin to think about it, and we realize I'm so small, just like Nebuchadnezzar said, we're nothing, and the Lord is everything. Verse 11, he sent her to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal, to show the people and the princes her beauty, for she was fair to look on. But the queen Vashti refused to come at the king's commandment by his chamberlains. And this man felt just like we would have, any of us would have in that same situation. Therefore was the king very wroth, and his anger burned in him. Now, you can't be very much more descriptive in demonstrating somebody's anger. This king was as mad as he possibly could physically be. He was very wroth, and he burned with anger. He was furious. At the same time, he's drunk. He had been merry with wine. So you can imagine how out of control this king would be, and yet the law of the Medes and Persians still governed him. Look what happens, verse 13. Then the king said to the wise men, which knew the times, for so was the king's manner toward all that knew law and judgment. And the next unto him was Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, which saw the king's face, and which sat first in the kingdom. What shall we do unto the queen Vashti according to the law, because she hath not performed the commandment of the king Ahasuerus by the chamberlains? So, just as there was a law that was not able to be changed, that was given by the king, the results of that, the penalty for that, needed to be followed according to the law. And so the king, even though he was drunk and even though he was very angry, went to these men and he said, what can I do for vindication in this situation? She's broken my law, she's broken my decree, so she's got to suffer something. What is the result? What needs to happen here? And so what shall we do according to law, because she hath not performed the commandment of the king? And Memucan answered before the king and princes, Vashti the queen hath not done wrong to the king only, but also to all the princes and to all the people that are in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus. And they'll go on to explain that, which we'll read in a moment, but just consider this. The king wants to bring Vashti to accountability. He wants vindication, and he wants a pound of flesh because he's mad. So he wants her to suffer. But he can't do something outside of the law. So imagine his frustration that he can't do something outside the law. But find me something, he says to these 7 men. Find me something that we can charge her with so that she can be put out of the queenship. Find me something that we can charge her with. Does this sound like anything that would happen today? Show me the man, I'll show you the crime. Doesn't that show you the crime, I'll show you the man? How does that statement go, I said it wrong, but I hope you know it. But the point is, they just make stuff up. They'll make stuff up, and that's what they did here. Memucan answered the king and the princes, Vashti the queen hath not done wrong to the king only, but also to all the princes. See, king, we figured it out. We know how to charge her. What she did was not just against you. It was actually a public disturbance. This is a national security issue. She has caused a problem for the entire nation. Notice why. For this deed of the queen, verse 17, shall come abroad unto all women, so that they shall despise their husbands in their eyes. When it shall be reported, the king Ahasuerus commanded Vashti the queen to be brought in before him, but she came not. They said, king, Vashti is causing problems in all the marriages of your whole kingdom because she didn't come. And they might not have been completely wrong about that, but they're using this to try to charge her so that she can be dismissed. So you commanded her, she came not, and so all the women are going to despise their husbands. All the women, because she's the queen and she modeled this, they're going to say, well, if the queen can do it, I can do it too. And so just because, husband, you said we're going to do this, I don't have to listen to you. So, verse 18, likewise shall the ladies of Persia and Media say this day unto all the king's princes, which have heard the deed of the queen. So, not only is this going to happen in the general populace with husbands and wives, but you've got 127 princes here to whom you just showed your glory and honor, and their ladies, their queens, basically, their lesser queens, are going to despise them. They won't listen. So this is just bad for everybody. No ladies are going to listen to their husbands now. They are going to be a problem because she didn't do it. And so verse 18, thus shall there arise too much contempt and wrath. So they said, look at the end of this. The women are going to have contempt for their husbands, and the men are going to have wrath toward their wives. All of this came about because of Vashti's deed, because she didn't come. And so come down with the crown. And so now we have something that we can actually charge her with. She's causing a disturbance in the whole kingdom. So now we have something. But just her not coming might have been a personal offense to you, but that wasn't part of the laws in Medes and Persians. So they had to find something else to charge her with. So they did. And we might think, well, this is just palace intrigue. This is just the way of the world and them trying to figure out how to do things. Yes, God was using it though, wasn't he? If Vashti remained king or queen, Esther wouldn't have been queen. So the Lord allowed this to happen and used the results of this dysfunctional marriage. Verse 19, if it please the king, let there go a royal commandment from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Medes and Persians, that it be not altered, that Vashti come no more before King Ahasuerus. And let the king give her royal estate unto another that is better than she. So now, king, you have to make a law, because you can't do anything about this, but now you can, here's how you can fix it going forward. Make a law that because Vashti did what she did, she's no longer going to be queen, and anybody who does what Vashti did is going to be punished. When the king's decree, which he shall make, shall be published throughout all the empire, for it is great, all the wives shall give to their husbands honor, both to great and small. So the problem will be solved. The wives will honor their husbands. The husbands then won't be mad at the wives, and so it'll be all good. The saying pleased the king and the princes. The king did according to the word of Memucan, for he sent letters into all the king's provinces, into every province according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language, that every man should bear rule in his own house, and that it should be published according to the language of every people. Well, if they would have just read the Bible, they wouldn't have had to make a law regarding this, okay? Because the Lord had already established this type of a home relationship, this type of a family setup. But when the Lord did it, he did it better. He didn't start with the women honoring their husbands. He started with the men leading their wives right. But notice how they kind of hit on something in that wives should submit to their husbands, but he starts with the wives. And then, now the husbands won't be mad. Back to verse 18. Thus there shall rise too much contempt and wrath. He starts with the ladies, then he comes to the men. And the reason for that is because Ahasuerus, the king, was acting in revenge toward his wife. So, sometimes the world does something half right. But even when the world has something right, it's often wrong. Does that make sense? So that doesn't mean we throw out the part that's right, but we have to have the right focus on it. I think of the family condition of maybe the 1940s and 1950s, 1960s, early 1960s was better than it is today. Men bore rule in their houses more than they do today. However, if you talk to people whose parents who were born in that time, they would say, well, my dad was very hard. My dad was mean. My dad was angry. You know, he come into the 70s and they came back from Vietnam and they're angry, they're mean. And so we say, okay, well, that's not right. But that doesn't mean that women should be empowered to be feminists either, okay? So do you see how they kind of had it right, but they had the wrong focus? They focused on the women first. So again, men, leadership is our responsibility. And then women, submission is your responsibility. But let's get that in a scriptural pattern rather than a fleshly pattern, because they hit on something right, but they went about it the wrong way. But the point in all this, overarchingly, is the fact that God was using this situation. So, without violating their laws, they got rid of Vashti, and this paved the way for Esther. And we think, up to this point, we think this is all just Babylonian stuff going on. This has nothing to do with God's people. If we were to read these events today and they were to happen in some country that is extant today, we would say that has nothing to do with the people of God. Absolutely nothing. But it does, because God is working all things together for good, and God was doing that here. So that's as we got through chapter 1 tonight. We'll begin in chapter 2 next week. But this is all set up. Do you see how the Lord was setting up time before, so that as Esther came in, he could preserve his people? He knew about Haman long before Haman knew what he was going to do. And so the Lord is showing us, before anybody even knows there's a problem, I'm working. Before Mordecai even knew he's going to have to help Esther as she goes before the king, God is working to put Esther into that position as the queen. because without that, this never would have happened. By the way, without Esther being in that position as the queen, Mordecai might not have been where he was to foil the plot of assassination against the king, which brought him reward later on. So the Lord is working in so many ways. It's really amazing as you read this book, considering it, putting it in the setting where it is, where these are the people of God in Babylon, and you realize the levels. There's probably like 6 or 8 levels of the Lord working. You have them in Babylon, but God fulfilling his promise. You have the king throwing this great party. Then you have Vashti. Then you have Esther being put in. And so we have all of these levels of the Lord working to the culmination at the end of the book. All right, let us pray. Father, I thank you for your word, and I thank you for your working. I pray, Lord, that you'd help us not to forget that though we may not see you working, as Job said, I can't perceive what you're doing, even as though I know that you're right around somewhere. I pray, Lord, that you'd help us to recognize you are working for us, and you're working with us, you're working in us. Help us to be obedient to you day by day, so that when we come to the end of it, we can say, wow, what God hath wrought. We praise you, Lord, for your fulfillment of your promises and protecting and preserving your people. And we know that your promises to us will be fulfilled as well. And we thank you that you are working all things together for good, to them that love God, to them that are the called according to his purpose. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.